No, well, I'm being told it's always the airlines, right? Yeah. Anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to talk a little Formula One. We're going to talk about the Kingfisher, Sahara Force India, and what is now Racing Point. Talk a little bit about that team and about some of the large personalities involved in it. Thank you. All right, so Spiker F1 was kind of a middle-tier grid spot on the Formula One grid. And for those that don't know, the Formula One grid is 20 spots, 2 spots for each team, 10 Formula One teams. And this Spiker F1 team that is sort of forms the basis for this team we're about to talk about occupied basically the middle of the grid. It was not Ferrari. It was not one of these top teams that had these guaranteed payments. And it was not necessarily the bottom of the grid, although they were sort of closer to that end than the top. But they, as far as a team on the grid, they were middle of the pack. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the team. So in 2007, the Spiker F1 team was purchased by Vijay Mallya, an Indian businessman, and Michael Mole, a Dutch businessman, for $120 million, roughly $120 million in 2007. And they changed the name to Force India from this Spiker F1 team. And the main sponsor was Kingfisher, which is a brand owned by Vijay Mallya. More on Kingfisher later. So they purchased this F1 team. Kingfisher was the main sponsor. They occupied the middle of the grid, as we mentioned, and they kind of operated in this sense for the next 4 years, doing pretty well, middle of the grid, etc. Then in 2011, they got a large cash infusion from a company called Sahara India Parabar, which is a big private conglomerate, and they invested $100 million into the Force India team, and in return, they got 42.5% of the stock. Vijay Mallya had 42.5% of the stock, and then Michael Mole had 15%. And when that investment took place, they renamed the team Sahara Force India. Okay, so why this large infusion of capital? Why was this needed in 2011? And that takes us back to Kingfisher. So Kingfisher is an Indian brand actually owned by this United Brewers Group. United Brewers Group, again, it's a large conglomerate in India, and it's a company that Vijay Mallya chaired, still chairs to this day, that he chaired since he was 28, and that he chaired since his father, kind of bequeathed that chairmanship on him. After his father passed away, Vijay took over at the age of 28. So he was chair of this United Brewers Group, and one of the brands that it owned was Kingfisher. Kingfisher is a beer company, and they actually had, I think today they have over 50% of the beer market. At this time, they had over 40% of the beer market in India. Extremely dominant brand in India. And United Brewers Group, again, it had part interest in 60 businesses or something, but its bread and butter was the beverage business, and namely this beer, Kingfisher. But it wasn't the beer, it wasn't Kingfisher the beer that caused the problems. It was the airline. And isn't it always an airline that causes all these problems? Buffett's famous for saying that he needs a hotline to call because, he can call it up in the middle of the night and be like, "Hi, my name's Warren Buffett. I'm thinking about buying an airline." Of course, that happened until then he bought all the airlines and then proceeded to sell all the airlines when the pandemic came through. But again, airlines always have this attractive look. Carl Icahn got totally upside down in the TWA deal. And there's something about airlines. It's always airlines. And we're not going to get too into the economics of airlines and how it works, but there's a lot of government involvement. There's a lot of infrastructure needed that the airline may or may not own. And there's some complexities to the business, maybe that we'll get into in the future, that make it hard to value and that make it very enticing. And then you end up many times with a big, big problem. And in Kingfisher's case, this was the case. So in 2003, Vijay Mallya went ahead and began kind of the incorporating process of Kingfisher Airlines. Brought it to fruition. It began operating in 2005. Well, by 2005, it had large amounts of debt. It had operating losses, which again, for a startup airline is not uncommon, or for a startup, really any business is not necessarily uncommon. But it would prove to be extremely difficult to get out of those operating losses. They would remain for many years. So in 2005, when they began operating, Vijay Mallya announced that they were going to do a $200 million capital raise via an IPO, initial public offering. And in that process, and in kind of doing that, it came out that, again, that they were in heavy debt and had many operating losses. But the idea behind this capital raise was that they were going to go out, do an acquisition, and try to kind of move out of that. So again, like acquisitions, every once in a while they're very accretive. They help the shareholders and they help the business that acquired them. Many times there's issues, and especially if a full amount of due diligence has not been done, there's going to be large issues. And that was the case with Kingfisher. So Kingfisher in 2007 purchased the Indian airline Air Deccan. I hope I'm saying that right, Air Deccan. And it was a company that was in much worse shape than they anticipated. It had heavy losses. It was not the appropriate amount of due diligence, sort of allegedly was not done. It was a deal brokered by Rothschild Bank. But they'd made this purchase, and it only compounded the issue, right? They spent a lot of money to make the purchase, and it was not accretive, did not help the bottom line. Instead, it made things much worse. Over that following 3-year period, Kingfisher Airlines as a whole lost $140 million. They took that Air Deccan, their routes, their planes, rebranded them Kingfisher Red to try to be kind of a budget airline within the Kingfisher airline, but it did not help. By 2011, they were going to shut down Kingfisher Red. Also in 2011, the bank accounts of Kingfisher Airlines were frozen 2 separate times for non-payment of taxes. There was an effort by the management team of Kingfisher to try to sell real estate that Kingfisher was operating in to kind of stem these losses and create some liquidity. It was not successful. And by 2012, they had half the fleet grounded and had lost something like $980 million. And by 2013, that company filed for bankruptcy. So that 2011 acceleration of losses, freezing of bank accounts, coincides with the Sahara India Parawar investment in the Formula One team. So meanwhile, there's a Canadian billionaire businessman watching his investment in Michael Kors grow drastically. This man is Lawrence Stroll. He's the owner of one of the most valuable Ferrari collections in the world. He's the owner of Mount Tremblant Raceway, which is right near the Mount Tremblant ski resort, where they have these little frozen honey sticks. Basically, it's like honey that's laid on ice and then rolled up with a stick, and you eat it like a lollipop. And allegedly they sell like 500 to 1,000 of those a day at this resort. But anyway, this Canadian businessman, Lawrence Stroll, and his partner, Silas Cho, had seen their investment in Michael Kors really grow. In 2014, they had sort of sold all of the last pieces of it and had made out very well. Lawrence Stroll's company, sportswear holding company, again, sold out in 2014. He was a Williams Formula One investor, and much of that was because his son was there, or his investment helped lead his son there, et cetera, et cetera. But his son was a driver. Lance Stroll was a driver for Williams Formula One. And Lawrence Stroll was not happy with what was going on at Williams. He would have made changes. He would have liked to build the brand differently, but there was only so much he could do. He was basically a donor, but he was not an owner and didn't have that control. That was still with the Williams family. So there wasn't a whole lot he could do about Williams and what he wanted to do. And at this time, they were kind of wallowing at the back of the grid. But again, he could only do so much. Now, as Kingfisher progressed through bankruptcy proceedings, By 2016, things had really heated up, and there was a consortium of 13 Indian banks that were pursuing Vijay Mallya for $1.35 billion in loan money that they believed he was a willful defaulter on. So he had, they had declared bankruptcy, they were going through the proceedings, and these banks viewed that he was a willful defaulter, quote unquote, and they alleged that he had siphoned off much of the money abroad and into tax havens to purchase interests in up to 40 other companies. And so they built this complaint and they took it to the Indian government in an effort to try to get Vijay to be barred from leaving the country. And they were told that Vijay had already left. He had fled to the UK on March 2nd in 2016 and was staying on his estate in the UK, trying to avoid extradition, basically contesting it in the UK courts. Now, all of this is going on. Vijay still owns and controls Sahara Force India, but by 2018, all of this had taken its toll. There were attempts to freeze assets. He's hiding in the UK, basically, or not hiding, but he's barred from going anywhere besides the UK. He has his passport revoked. And by 2018, this had trickled into the Formula One team, and they were no longer solvent. They were no longer able to pay their bills, pay their payroll. And in 2018, they were put into administration in the UK, which is actually where this team was based. And administration is similar to Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States. It effectively comes in, basically wipes out the equity to some degree, and tries to find a way to maintain that company as a going concern, to pay its debts, to potentially negotiate with creditors. And so it got put into administration. Now, according to the administration report, when this happened at the end of July 2018, actually July 27th, the team only had £240,000 in their account, and by the end of the month needed £2.2 million just to pay payroll. And the administrative report also estimated that following month, August, the team would need another £9.6 million to continue operating, and that they had, quote, no meaningful income in the foreseeable future. So enter Lawrence Stroll, the billionaire Canadian businessman, fed up with things at Williams, deep-pocketed after all of the Michael Kors work and other business dealings, but that was a huge windfall. He turned his eye towards Sahara Force India. Now, according to the administrator and the administrator report, all bids had to be in by August 6th. At that time, there were 5 bids in, but only one bid tried to keep the company as a going concern, which was Stroll's bid. And the administrator, according to them, is legally bound to give precedent or preference to an offer that attempts to maintain the company as a going concern. So that was the offer that was looked at first. Now, a piece of the offer that Stroll made, it was, again, an attempt to buy the stock and keep it going as a going concern. But as a fallback, they also offered £90 million for the assets. And ultimately, that's what happened. It was able to be done much quicker. Buying the company as a going concern would have taken more due diligence, and the asset deal was able to be done quicker. So even though the Stroll bid was the only bid that attempted to keep the company going as a going concern, it ended up purchasing the assets of the company for £90 million. And the name of the team was changed to Racing Point. And again, although it was a new entity, it occupied those same middle grid spots that Sahara Force India did. Now, of course, Lawrence Stroll is taking on another large project and another large deal in trying to save Aston Martin, the auto manufacturer. He invested £182 million into the company in exchange for a little over 16% of the company. And Aston Martin now will be a title sponsor of the Racing Point Formula One team. So he's brought Aston Martin into Formula One and put a large cash infusion in with a percentage of the company as payment for doing that. So we'll see where that ends up. But there you have it. That's a little bit about the Formula One and the Kingfisher Force India. Of course, it's changed names here a fair amount, and it's got a new owner. And now we've got Aston Martin in Formula One. We'll see if Lawrence Stroll can effectively save this British manufacturer. Thank you. Have a great day. Again, like, subscribe. Anything helps. We're early in the process. Thank you so much for listening. And again, have a great day. Thanks.